Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing personal stories of transformation and collective healing from people who have been touched by cancer. My name is Claire DeLaslo, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. Our guest, Liz Curran, is a holistic health coach and co-founder of Health Navigators. Alongside her partner Karla, who I interviewed for episode 25, Liz works with cancer thrivers and those seeking to heal from chronic or emotional illness. Her work is based on the 10 healing factors introduced in Kelly Turner's books, Radical Remission and Radical Hope. In this conversation, we discuss how Liz's experience of losing her sister to cancer led her to the Radical Remission Project, and how she works to create space for people to share their stories and forge their own pathways to healing. Hi, Liz. Welcome to Cancer Talks.
Hi, Claire. Thanks for having me.
I thought we could start with just hearing what inspired you to come on and have a conversation with me.
Well, I love what you guys have been doing, and you and I crossed paths, I guess, probably about a year ago now.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to support you guys, and I know that my story might be an inspiration for somebody else. So I thought it would be worth sharing.
Thanks. I'm wondering what your earliest memory of cancer is.
That's a good question. I actually don't have a whole lot of really far back cancer stories, which I'm grateful for, obviously. People in my family did not typically have a cancer diagnosis. So my first kind of, pull the rug out from under my feet moment was when my sister was diagnosed. She passed away 7 years ago. So 8 years ago, she was diagnosed. And I can remember where I was standing and what we talked about and what I was looking at, every detail.
Yeah, I am interested to hear that story in all of the details. But before answering that, could you reach back and think about how you would have defined cancer at the time? If someone's like, "What's cancer, Liz?" What would you have said?
Well, she specifically had breast cancer. And in my mind, I was like, oh, well, people get over that all the time. That was no big deal. It wasn't scary. I mean, it was obviously terrifying, but I think I covered it up with, I know so many people that have gotten over it, more that have gotten over it than haven't at that point. So I was just concerned, but I was basically being a cheerleader for sure.
Mm-hmm. So take us back to that moment. I want to hear how she told you, how you felt.
Well, she had come to visit me. So she lived in Massachusetts and I live in New Jersey. And so she'd come to visit me for New Year's holiday. Her families often would spend time together during that time. And my niece and nephew were maybe 7th and 8th grade. I guess it was 8th and 9th grade at the time. So I really wanted them to be here and I love them and I loved hanging out with them. And she's like, I have this lump on my collarbone. I got to go back home and get checked out. And she was just leaving early. So I was like, oh, it's probably just swollen lymph node from an infection, just stay. I was trying to pressure her to stay. And she's like, no, I need to go. But I had not realized that she had over the previous month been to a breast surgeon. And she really hadn't shared that because I don't really think she believed something was wrong with her yet.
Yeah.
Because every time she talked to me, she was talking almost like in question marks. So the day she called to tell me, she left early. Her kids stayed with her husband. We had a nice visit. I was bummed that she left, but I understood, obviously, she does need to take care of her health. So maybe a week later after they had left and life resumed normally after, I guess that was 2013, turning 14, January. And she called on the phone. We talked every day, multiple times a day on the phone because we weren't near each other, but we just were very aligned with our friendship and, sisterhood, I guess. So she called and I wasn't expecting it to be anything different than usual. And I was in this room and I had my office at the time in here. And I was just having a private conversation with her. And she was just talking about, she's like, I had to follow up on that lump on my collarbone and I had to go back for another mammogram and nothing's showing up on my mammogram, but the nurse still thinks it's breast cancer.
Wow.
And I was like, really? And in my mind, that just didn't make sense because mammogram equals how you detect it.
Yeah.
And so what did this nurse know? And I was like, okay, well, if that's the case, and I just started pacing my house. So I remember I was like on the other side of the wall behind me, and I was just looking through the glass doors, and I remember talking to her about, like, went into pep talk mode and telling her how many people I knew that had overcome it and how few I knew that didn't. And little did I know the reason it didn't show up on a mammogram was actually a really scary sign, because it made it a very aggressive. And she had something called inflammatory breast cancer, which only shows up in the tissue, not as a tumor. Wow. So she was like, yeah, I have a rash, but I didn't think anything of it, but I guess that's a sign of this other kind of cancer. So for those who don't know, inflammatory breast cancer does not show up on a mammogram. And it can show up as a rash in your armpit, almost like your deodorant was causing you a rash. So it might not even be that significant, not to send people, worrying about rashes from deodorant, which can happen. So she ended up, having to go through MRI and all the testing, and then she got that conclusive diagnosis. And that felt, stuff like that just takes time with different testing. And I feel like that could have been easily, weeks later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, on that phone call, was it like, my sister has cancer, or it was kind of a later moment that?
It was probably later. I was like, well, my sister might have cancer. That's weird. Kind of like surreal, not really processing it to be what it was. Obviously, I could not have known the path that was coming. So she, again, once she got the diagnosis, my husband actually is an administrative executive in cancer centers. And at the time he was at one where he was with the number one doctor for inflammatory breast cancer in the world. He's like, wow, this guy sits next to me in my meetings every week. Like, I could talk to him about it. And we found out that his protege was in the hospital system that's closest to her. So she was able to go directly to his kind of number two. And she had a really good experience with her, but she struggled with, should I come down and see him? You live right there. Maybe I should come visit him too. And I guess they just decided it was best to stay where they were, because I'm sure you're familiar with kind of like the snowball that happens once you meet your oncologist. You almost marry them because you feel scared. And if it's a positive relationship with the oncologist, you're not looking to leave. So I think they both decided they just wanted to like stay put. And he obviously could easily kind of talk and mentor her a little bit if needed. But that was, I think, really when, and I don't even remember that conversation or what led to that conversation, the moment where she was conclusively telling me. I think that probably was traumatic.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's all a process. It's like this continuum of cancer coming into the frame slowly. Where do you
like
draw
little,
the line?
Little breadcrumbs are showing you the path, but you don't really see it because you don't want to.
Yeah.
And then you look back and you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's what was happening.
Which is so different than how I usually hear people who've received a diagnosis tell the story. They're like, it was this moment, I was wearing this shirt, they said these words, the office smelled like this. For the person who receives it directly, it's like usually like really lucid and specific. I actually haven't heard, you kind of brushed over it, like, I'm sure everyone talks about this, but I know a lot of people talk about feeling like they don't have a choice in their oncologist. And then there's this also more conversation happening about firing your doctor, and
right, true.
Patient empowerment. But you're the first person I've heard say, like, fear, it creates that bond to the first oncologist you get assigned to. I think that's so real. And I just hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah, it's really, I would say, quite common for people who have a strictly conventional route, and they don't tend to even feel empowered to know they can get a second opinion, because once you're on the, sometimes we call it the machine, you go in and you find out the diagnosis, and then that by the end of that conversation, there's a plan that's been put in place for you, and you don't even know. You just digest cancer is in my body, and then you're going to come back next week and start XYZ. So there is a little bit of that culture to try to marry people to that oncology center. But I think really, if you like the person, if there's that kind of personal touch and that great bedside manner, which you would hope most oncologists have, not all, but if you connect with that, then you do feel safe and you do feel like you're connected to them. And then for my husband to validate that she was really top of her field, I think made a big difference as well.
I'm curious to hear a little more about your communication dynamic with your sister, your whole lives, and just a little more about your relationship.
It's kind of funny, actually. I don't have a whole lot of memory of her as a child because she was 9 years older than me.
Oh, yeah.
So by the time I was kind of old enough to remember things, she was off. She had a job. She was working all the time and kind of doing that teenager thing and just barely home with her activities. And then she went to college. And so during those years, obviously we were sisters, very much more sisters because there was a very big age gap. But once I got to college, she was on me. She was calling me. She was having me, come visit her in her place, and very connected, very motherly, very much like kind of checking in and making sure I'm making good choices and doing good things. And so that really, I saw that as a great thing. It really brought us to be super close. And the age difference it's definitely, the gap seemed to diminish.
Yeah.
And then she had kids, and then I had kids. I guess her kids were about, 6 and 7 when I had my first child. So then we were both in this early kid stage of life together.
Nice.
And she was so familiar with what stage I was in that we connected. We were both at home at the time. So we weren't working. So we had lots of talks, and she was great at giving advice. And I really appreciated receiving it from her. Sometimes people give advice and they're not the person you want it from. And then there's other people where you're just like, tell me more and don't leave me.
Yeah.
So that was kind of where we were. So, and as the years progressed, our kids got really close, even though they were, there was an age difference between them. And my husband and I, before we had kids, would go up and visit my niece and nephew easily 5 times a year. We were going up there just to spend time with them. So we got really close and had a really nice relationship with her and her husband and her kids. And so when we started adding kids to our family, it was just a nice kind of growth of our relationship.
That's really sweet.
Yeah. Before I even had kids, I had an hour commute from my drive to work and home. So every day she was my phone call at the end of my work day, so that we would have that time and just, how was the day? How are the babies? Her kids were only 15 months apart. So it was I think that's right, pretty tight time frame there on baby and baby. So she had lots to share.
And then, I know a good amount about your story and how you ended up building Health Navigators. And there's so much I want to talk about beyond just the scope of what that work is, because we've interviewed Karla about that, and we'll link everyone to your website in the show notes. But for context, I'd love to hear a little bit about the relationship between your sister's cancer and the work you're doing now.
So interestingly enough, when she was mid-diagnosis, she was having, significant chemo, moving on to mastectomy. I was having anxiety, and I was obviously very concerned. So a friend of mine was like, when I changed my diet, I really felt a big difference. I could sleep better, and I was able to, process emotionally a lot better. So I was like, well, if there's ever a time I need to do something, let's try that, because it's a good route to dive into if you need to focus on something else.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of I attached very deeply to I became very black and white with my diet, and I had, was eating really well because I could see the benefit of having a healthy lifestyle. So I dove into that. And then after she passed away, I had a lot of questions about, what else is there, because chemo, mastectomy, radiation didn't work for her. So is there something else? I just had this deep-seated feeling that there had to be more.
Yeah. What stage was she when she was diagnosed?
She was already metastasized. That's that was in her collarbone, was the lymph nodes were affected. But I think it was pretty much contained to that at the time. So we would talk again, still kept our phone calls all the time. And I think for her, it was easier to lean on me emotionally because we had the previous, several years of, kept staying connected, but also she didn't have to look me in the eye when she talked because we were on the phone.
Wow.
So it was a little bit easier for her to speak freely about her fears and make requests of me of like, if I'm not here anymore, I need you to do this. And that was hard for me, but I was also like so deeply attached to the fact that I wanted to be that person for her. And I was so glad that we had that time because it really felt like we needed to hold on to each other deeply in that year, more than ever. So after she passed, I was left with this kind of like, if you could see me as a cartoon, there would have been this big question mark over my head in a bubble.
Yeah.
And I was like, there has to be more. It can't just be that. And there is a lot. I'm not saying I'm against that. That plays its role for sure. But nobody ever, I would go to appointments with her when I would be up visiting and she would ask to see the path, like, oh, what's next? And they would say, oh, no, don't worry about it. We're going to stay right where we are now. And then we'll deal with that later. We'll talk about surgery when the time comes. But she really wanted to see a future.
Yeah.
And they kept putting a wall there.
Interesting.
And so she kept staying really like kind of just day to day to day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was from the perspective of somebody with like a very terminal cancer. And they just weren't able to communicate that to her because they're keeping her uplifted. But she would also ask, like, what else can I do? Is there anything I can do at home? Like, what else can I do? And they were like, oh, nothing, we got it. And with an aggressive cancer like that, it's really, throwing some lifestyle change into the mix doesn't necessarily do a whole lot. Yeah. But now with the work I do, I can see the power of it if, you have enough time.
Yeah.
So she just didn't have enough time. And so what happened was another friend of mine was diagnosed with another metastasized diagnosis or late stage, I guess. She had a very large tumor next to her heart in her thymus gland. And I didn't even know what a thymus gland was. I'd never even heard of it before. Yeah. And she said that her oncologists were telling her she had multiple opinions, traveled across the country to talk to different doctors, and nobody could really promise a chemo would do anything. She was 35 at that time. And she really was like, well, I'm going to do whatever I can to have the best quality of life I have as long as possible. So she ended up traveling to Mexico, and they did kind of an integrative approach with some, low dose chemo, but mostly lifestyle change. And when she came home and shared that with me, I was just blown away. I was like, what, diet and, what are all these things they're talking about? And it really opened my eyes to like this hope that there are things that we can do on our own to help with whatever the treatment plan is. And so within 6 months, my friend really, there was not much showing up on her PET scan at all. She was almost in complete remission. So we like to think that she was in remission at that time. They just weren't willing to say it just yet because they needed to see it prolonged. Yeah. And it did. She's still here all these years later. So for me, that was so powerful. I ended up starting a nonprofit with her and a few of our other friends to help people to fund for people to seek treatment outside of, stuff that's not covered by health insurance, so that they could do things like travel or seek some kind of care that they might not be able to afford to do otherwise. So that process, being involved at the nonprofit, really kind of took hold pretty quickly. And then at that point, I had decided to become a health coach previously. I honestly think it's funny now when I think back that I didn't relate becoming a health coach to working with cancer patients at all.
Whoa.
There was absolutely no connection. I just knew that I had changed my diet and I felt better. So I wanted to work with people to help them feel better. And then coinciding that, the universe works in beautiful ways. Coinciding with that was the starting of the nonprofit. And then over about probably the first 2 years or 3 years, maybe, of the nonprofit, I came to learn about Radical Remission, which you and Karla spoke about, which is 10 healing factors that were derived from research done on spontaneous remission cancer patients. And they're just lifestyle changes. So not small, just easy lifestyle changes, but they're lifestyle changes. So it's something everybody can do. And when I heard about the book and I opened it up and I read the table of contents, which is all of these 10 factors or 10 chapters. And I was just like hit with like a bolt of lightning. I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. I wanted to know what else there was, and this is what else there is. Mm-hmm. So not to get rid completely of conventional medicine, but the patient needs to feel like they have some influence over this. And if that just means that they have to reduce their stress or clean up their diet or infuse different elements of these factors into their life, it still helps them feel like they have something to control.
An active role. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the phrase patient empowerment, and just it really helps with hope, I think, and
Yes.
also helps with staying in the present, but just a feeling that rather than being fully at the mercy of these doctors who, you probably just met a few months ago, and who are they, and they must be really busy, and how is stress affecting their process, like you don't
Right. They're
know
human.
them. They're human, but you have lived in your body for your whole life. And yeah, one of my favorite things about Radical Remission and about the work that you do with Health Navigators is making that room and reminding people that how well they know themselves, and that kind of self-wisdom doesn't just disappear because cancer comes into the frame. Like, your body is reacting in all these ways that are a continuum from like how it has always behaved and the organism
Right.
you've always lived inside of.
Yeah. And it's no, I mean, it becomes very obvious once you start adopting lifestyle change that you become the one that's in charge of your health. And the medical team is the medical team. And maybe you have an integrative team as well, or whatever path you choose. But you start to see different changes. Maybe you're sleeping better because you stop drinking so much coffee, or, through a diet change, or you're exercising more, or you can't exercise anymore. So you choose to start meditating. So, like there's the different path for everybody. But once you start adopting one of those things, it just snowballs into the next one and the next one. And that feeling of like, I have some say of what goes on in this skin. And it's so powerful. And I think that's why I resonate so deeply with the factors, was because when my sister was sick and I dove into diet change, I had such tremendous healing from my anxiety. I was sleeping at night, even though my sister is, on the serious condition. And I was able to just, be calm and be supportive rather than just this kind of frenetic, anxious way I could have gone.
Right.
So it really helped me. And so when I did that, I think it really was helping me set the stage for really understanding the power of lifestyle change, because I did it myself.
I love the way you talk about changing your diet, because I can hear really clear the power, not just being in the nutrition and how that can, change your energy levels and help you sleep better, but I'm hearing how powerful it was for you to have sort of a project, or like something kind of creative and generative and healing to focus on, that was a lot simpler than the emotional.
Right. There was probably some avoidance there for sure, but that's okay. It helps kind of band-aid. And I honestly, I did go right into therapy at one point when we knew her diagnosis was shifting. I just couldn't deal because she was so upset and she was leaning on me hard. So I went to grief therapy. I actually found a grief therapist, and that was a godsend. It really helped me because I was only about halfway through her diagnosis when I started. And that was tremendously helpful because she helped me see, how different people in the family are going to respond differently to different diagnoses, and how it affects them, and their reaction is going to be different than yours. And so it helped me kind of process where my other family members were in their behavior, and her kids and her husband, and how they were reacting, and how I felt. And it was tremendously helpful. And I really feel like it made me more emotionally available for her, because I had someone else to kind of load onto, like the caregiver's caregiver in a way.
That's so good. Yeah, a lot of blessings in your experience of your sister's cancer journey, just that you were, for whatever reason, you were able to seek out the lifestyle change and seek out the therapy. I think for so many, there just isn't that room, or it just like doesn't occur. Like,
right. I think my intuition was just really loud, and I didn't even realize that's what it was. I just was following what made sense and felt comforting, because I've really needed comfort.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's one of the 10 healing factors that has been, that was like the most unfamiliar or challenging, like in your own, getting to know the different factors and teaching them, and which one was kind of the most foreign to you?
I think probably intuition by terminology was, I didn't really know that it's an actual thing in our bodies, and that we, ways to practice it and ways to hone it. And I think culturally we don't prioritize it.
Yeah.
And I was very strong, logically minded. So A plus B equals C makes all the sense. But if there's something and a feeling that made me feel guided to, the choices that I made, I didn't label it that way because I didn't know. So when I started to read the book, it really showed up for me as, oh, so we just have to listen. And we have to listen carefully, because sometimes these other, it's like the movie Inside Out with the different characters in the head. So, which ones are at play, and who's self, who is like the true self, and what does that self hear in the intuition?
What practices do you have to listen?
I really feel like the way I access it very much is, I do have a significant meditation practice. And most recently, I did a silent retreat about a month ago for 5 days. And that was really, really educational and empowering. I wasn't a big silent meditator prior to that. I did a lot of guided, but now I feel like that the place of making space for quiet is something that we just don't do as a country. And in that silence, we don't want to be sleeping. We want to be processing too. I mean, obviously sleep is necessary and good too, but you don't want to just meditate to go to sleep. You want to meditate at different points of your day where you can just stop, unplug, turn off the music, the phone, the TV, anybody to talk to, and just sit with ourselves. And that is so educational. It really helps you bring up, what's going on in your thoughts. What kind, my meditation teacher used to say, what are your top 10 tunes? What are the songs that are playing in your head, or the thoughts that keep coming up over and over during that meditation to cause that distraction? Obviously meditation, you're trying to stay focused, and once you fall off the path and bring yourself back, that's when you're being mindful. So what are those distractions? And for me, I feel very surprised sometimes, like, wow, that keeps coming up, and I didn't even know that was really a bother. And journaling is another one. So there was a practice I learned in my coaching program called the morning pages. It's Julia Cameron is the author of The Artist's Way. And she speaks about the morning pages, and you just basically wake up and just brain dump and just write for, however many minutes you set aside, so that while, before you even really get to like pick up your phone or talk to anyone, just write. And what comes up. And a lot of times it's what your subconscious has been working through in your sleep. Amazing. So then you're, again, just as you're writing, you're just kind of like one sentence to the next, you realize things come out of that. So it's a pretty intuitive process, especially if you go back and read through it later and digest what you wrote. But one of the things we talk about in the Radical Remission workshop is for the intuition factor is that night we tell them to go home and take a piece of paper and write a question on it before bed and fold it up and put it under their pillow. And then when they wake up, have that journal ready, read the question again, and just write the answer, because your body will process some of it while you're sleeping. And so then you can kind of like help figure out the answer. So that's my intuition perspective.
Those are great. Are you comfortable sharing one of your top 10 tunes?
Oh, I don't have anything specific. I would say usually it's family related. What are my kids' schedule? Who's going where? Are they happy? Are they anxious? Where are they mentally? And, how can I balance their busy life so that it doesn't turn into kind of like this typical snowball of, doing too much and not having enough time to process. So. Yeah,
it's so great to hear your own intuition practices. This summer, we're going to have a little intuition study group on Zoom with Cancer Talks. So might circle back and brainstorm more with you about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
I'm wondering if you could share one of the most difficult aspects of your work as a cancer coach.
I would say that, you get to know, well, especially because I do a lot of one-on-one coaching in addition to groups, regardless of whether it's one-on-one or in a group, on the days that somebody had scans that weren't going the way they thought. I think that is, probably because they're so, you emotionally attach yourself in some capacity to the people that you work with. And to see and know that someone is going through kind of that down of the roller coaster, or maybe the uphill of the roller coaster. It allows everybody in the space to feel powerless for that moment. But for me, working with so many different people that have so many different diagnoses and seeing the success that they're having, even on those roller coaster moments, I still don't think, oh, that's a death sentence. I just think, oh, well, they're going to have to change their meds, and they're going to have to start back to square one. And I know how hard that is. So just that's, maybe they're not dying, but it's devastating to them that their life has to get put on hold again, or maybe they were going to travel or start a new job or wanted to do something different and they can't. So kind of the grief over that loss for them is something that we kind of work with, because it's important for them to see the path. And, they've seen it before, because of obviously a lot of the people I work with are more later stage. So they're seeing reoccurrences, and they could end up being fine for 6 months and think they're in the clear. And then, the news comes again. So, I've been on that roller coaster with them, ups and downs quite a bit. And it's always hard because I can just relate to how difficult that is and how trying it can be emotionally and physically.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you were saying about supporting your sister and hearing everything she was going through, and that led you to seek out a grief therapist. But now your work is to receive, the emotional weight of the cancer journey, like all the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You know what? I think most of my work is so, it's first of all, extremely interesting, because I get to just hear these stories, people's stories every day about, and most of the time they're inspirational, because the people I work with tend to have this kind of inspired mindset of looking forward and, not seeing the change in the diagnosis as a death sentence. It's more of like viewing cancer as a chronic illness. So, a setback is a setback, and it's, it can be devastating, but they're still inspired, and I have not worked with anybody yet that is just like, I'm done. And I know people do that, but I haven't met anybody yet that has been working with me in that way, where they're, we're working towards that piece. And I do have a lot of resources just working in this field with, end of life doulas and different things like that I'm prepared for the day when that does come, if and when. But I really do still see so much hope, and, all right, we got to do this again. And I can then refer back to, previous instances where we've been on the roller coaster together and remind them of how they felt during these, stages of overcoming. And it really lets them see how far they have come anyway. And that really usually helps them too.
Yeah. It's so good to have someone who's been with you through the journey to remind you of, just what it was like in other moments, because it's really easy to lose track of what it feels like to kind of come out of a really dark moment when you're in it. Yeah.
And I certainly encourage all of my clients to have a therapist. I don't play that role. I do a lot of listening, but the difference, I would say the biggest difference that I see between therapy and coaching is therapy helps you process the past, and coaching is like, where are you today and what are your goals and how can we accomplish them?
Right.
Which is a little bit different. I mean, it's very different from therapy. Therapy is kind of, I'm not trained to go deep and deal with trauma and things like that. You can certainly tell me stories, but in the end, I'm going to say, oh, this is a great resource. Contact this person, that person. And, now more than ever, the loneliness of the pandemic and the diagnosis combination has been something that we've been working with a lot.
Could you share a few ways that you recharge after doing that work besides therapy?
It's a good question. I will say that I do a lot of exercise. I do triathlons in the summer. I always pick at least one to train for so that I have incentive to work out, but it really is a great stress relief for me. And obviously meditating, but I can't say enough about the power of social support and having just positive people in my circle, and very supportive family and friends, and my extended family lives nearby. So just knowing that they're all there, and obviously I'm not talking to them about my clients, but I can just focus on my normal and what my normal looks like. And to your point, it's very interesting, the timing of our conversation, because I'm about to be the age my sister was when she was diagnosed.
Wow.
And so next year I'll be 48, which is when she was diagnosed. And so I've sat with that a lot this year, thinking, we were very similar physiologically, and what does my future hold? And so it helps me stick with the lifestyle changes, obviously, but it also, I get a lot of peace knowing that I lived a very different path than she did heading into this point because of the lessons she learned. Her diagnosis really led me to learn about this stuff and just the different ways that I can change, especially stress reduction. Done a lot of work in that way. And it really helps. I truly believe that will be what helps me kind of get through. If I had the same fate, I may not know. So
did you have a pretty stressed out baseline, I don't know, a decade ago?
Prior to? Yes. Yeah. Because I had 3 kids and they were, I think they were 6, 4, and a newborn at the time. And my sister was diagnosed when my youngest was 1 going on 2. So I had my hands full for sure, just day to day. And it's funny, something like a cancer diagnosis really does give you perspective. So I've seen my parenting change significantly after that point than the prior.
Oh, wow.
So
what's an example of how your parenting has changed?
I think I'm just calmer.
Yeah.
I used to be much more frantic and more, tried to have, structure for the kids, and let's do it this way. They need to go to bed at this time. And somebody knocked on the door during nap time and my dog would bark. I'd be super stressed out. They were going to wake up. And that was the beginning. And then when I had the third and she was kind of more of a little kid or baby when this was happening, I just loved her. And she gave me a lot of strength for my peace and my, my healing. And we have very different kinds of relationships with my kids, seeing how they were, at what age they were when that happened and how much of me they had prior and, and after. So thankfully they've been with me longer in this more relaxed way than they were, with the new mom mentality.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about a recent lesson from a client or from your experience of running, one of the Health Navigators workshops. Was there any, small or large, but recent kind of aha moment?
I have to say the community itself it just builds on its own. It's so fabulous to watch these people. So I do a few deep dive groups. We call them deep dive groups. They're kind of a weekly coaching groups with the same little unit of people.
Yeah.
And this one group continues to meet period after period, ongoing. And to see the support, because they've connected really deeply at this point. It's been almost a year we've been working together, and they really know each other and they know each other's diagnosis. And they remember when somebody has a scan or somebody, has a family thing that they might have been stressed about. And they always remember to ask, how did everything go? How did, and the beauty in the beginning of a conversation when somebody might have had bad scan results and how an hour later they'll feel uplifted and held and really supported because they're talking to a bunch of people that truly understand and have been in their shoes. And that's not something that's easy to find in, day-to-day life when you're, just living in a world of non-cancer.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you mentioned loneliness at the end of some answer. I forget, but I wanted to circle back because, you're right. Like it's especially in, white American 2022, maybe especially in more suburban towns. And, there's like having a big group who knows what's going on for you and time to share each other's stories and be in each other's lives. It's really hard, not to mention the pandemic. But
right, it is interesting when periodically we'll have people from Europe coming in because everything's virtual, so we'll have a lot of Canadians and some Europeans, and when they join the conversation, it's so interesting to see their different perspectives and because of their medical approaches. And it opens everybody's eyes to what's beyond the borders. And that's really valuable because sometimes we can be very kind of like country centric and not realize that there are way more many other countries out there that have fantastic cancer treatments that we just don't adopt here because it's not, the framework of our health system.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as loneliness goes, I have seen this, and they have flat out said how healing and helpful this is to be a part of, because they really can, let their husband be a husband, let their kids be their kids, let their sister be their sister, and put that here when they just simply can't ever truly communicate the depth of what they're feeling to someone else.
Yeah, that is so powerful. I mean, social support in general, of course, but the specific kind of support you can get from other people with cancer, where there's like less explaining to do, and also this resounding consent of everyone came here specifically because they want to be able to process the cancer experience.
Right. Yep.
So reciprocal.
Yeah. And even the other day, one of the people in one of our small groups, we do have some people with life-changing autoimmune disorders in our groups as well. Mm. So it's not just strictly cancer, but predominantly so. But she had her own, as she said, her own radical remission. And we just all cried. She had just had such great medical news, and we just were all so moved by the work she'd been doing, and really just beautiful. And I was like, oh, you got me. I'm crying this time. And I think I cry more when I hear the good news than when I hear the scary news. And maybe that's because I feel the need to be strong for the person that's maybe feeling like they need the support. But oh my gosh, it's so rewarding when the good news comes.
I relate to that. I'm a happy crier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, just those moments of being able to experience joy together when you've also been experiencing hardship together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you'd think that if someone's having a bad day, that hearing about someone else's good day can be, sometimes there is some jealousy there internalized that they really just wish that was them. But other times it's just so hopeful. Like, I've seen her go through this, and I see if she can do it, then I can.
Yeah.
And that is really necessary. It's part of the hope, right? That all cancers are so unique and so different that it's not possible for everybody to have the same story. But that's why there is hope, because your story may not relate to the statistics you're given.
That makes me think about sharing your good day with someone who's having a bad day. It makes me think of just one of the strengths of a Health Navigators group or any kind of cancer support group, because I think it's really hard in friendship or partnership to trust that it could be okay to share a good day when or even good news or anything you're happy about. It's really easy to be afraid that that's gonna make someone jealous or just make it worse.
Yeah. And people also fear sharing good news because they also wait for the bottom to drop out. So do I really want to tell my mom that I had great scans if next month I don't? Do I want her to ride the roller coaster with me? So it can be a nice, safe place to put that and celebrate and be scared. And same with negative results. Sometimes they don't want to share that because it's almost too much work to manage everybody else's emotions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the part I'm thinking about is the tendency to manage people's emotions when we're in, when we're going through, it's a life partner and you've got to live together and you're in each other's energy fields all the time. And so nice to have this separate container where it's everyone knows we're going to come here, we're going to share the good and the bad and let that feel, loving and supportive. Not worry so much about is this the right time to tell this person? How are they going to take it?
Right. Yeah. What's interesting is what we tend to do with our small groups is we'll have a book that we'll focus on as an anchor. So we'll read a chapter or two a week. And a lot of times it's books that have, leading questions at the end for you to journal about or reflect on every day or whatever. So the accountability is to make sure that those questions and things get answered at the end of the chapter. And then we dialogue about that when we meet as just a way to give an anchor to the meeting.
Yeah.
And then allow whatever comes up. And a lot of times people don't talk about, there's so many different levels of their diagnosis, their stage, their type of treatment. There's so many differences that some groups, it will never even come up. Some people are like, oh, I don't even know what that person had when they think back about the previous 6 weeks. And that's what I think that's like the special sauce of the Health Navigators is that while you certainly can share and people do share their good and bad days, it's not really focusing on that. And they've come from a lot of either Facebook groups or other support groups, and they feel like it's very down because it's a place for people to share what's wrong. And they want to really be able to think positive. So, giving a book as an anchor that's got hope or a hopeful spin or some kind of self-help, I call it self-help spin, it does help. And then they learn different, modalities to help each other, with their mental space on healing.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the same of cancer talks whenever I'm always working on how do I answer, what do you do? And I say, produce a podcast. What's it about? Cancer. And then of course, everyone's face falls or kind of freezes and they're like, I don't know. Oh, that sounds hard or something. And but the way you just described it is, I really relate to that feeling of being in a cancer community, and we, just focus on similar things as the Health Navigators. That's kind of how we found each other and why we've been working together. But that it's so funny when someone who's not part of that community tries to ask you about your work, and often one of the first questions is, I'm like sharing a story of like something probably uplifting that I was talking about in an interview, and the first question is always, oh, what cancer did they have? And 90% of the time after I've published an episode and written all this copy and talked to this person for hours, I'm like, I can't remember.
Right. That wasn't the point, right?
Yeah, it's not the point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know why I was just thinking about how, when people are going through the process and everybody tells them how brave they are, it almost feels strange to them because I don't think they feel like they have a choice.
Right.
It's not bravery. Like my friend who went to Mexico said, I don't have a choice. I want to be alive. And this other option wasn't really going to help me. So I ask her, at times we talk about how if she had the option for chemo, she would have just done that. But because it was so late stage and dire for her to get, she was willing to seek outside the borders, and that's what healed her. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to think about. It's almost like feels inauthentic in a way to tell someone how brave they are to you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Empowered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different words.
Right. That's so real. I mean, I think also, I think about self-love and like love for your family, I think is also an amazing force.
Yes.
Like to, kind of reframe away from bravery, especially for those who turn to radical remission or turn to all these different healing modalities that we've been talking about. It does take a lot of love, and it takes getting over a little bit of the fear, or, because the mainstream cancer setup is like, this is really scary. We need to fight it. And you need to listen to this doctor. And so, maybe it's not bravery, but I wonder if when people say that, they're pointing to something, especially when people have sought out, your work or changing your lifestyle. People, outsiders look at that and they're like, how do they possibly have the energy to do this? And it's like,
right. Yeah. And it is brave to make the decision, for example, to not listen to what your doctor suggests and ask questions and see if maybe there's a different treatment that's good for you. Yeah. So that empowerment really is bravery. But I think it just feels very strange to hear that coming directly to you. But wow, that was really empowering of you to ask your doctor that. That's a much better word. I think that really would probably feel more like a compliment than, oh, you're so brave, because nobody asked for this,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share before we close?
I think we covered a lot of really good things.
Cool. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to continue to collaborate.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. Write to us at info@cancertalks.com if you have a story to share. If you'd like to be in community with other cancer thrivers seeking personal transformation, join us for free workshops on Zoom. Visit cancertalks.com/Zoom to register. If you're moved to donate, please visit cancertalks.com/donate.